Much of the focus in esports and professional gaming is on franchise leagues, like the Call of Duty League or the Overwatch League, and games like Counter-Strike and Fortnite. But did you know that there are more than 30 games with professional esports ecosystems, each with its own base of followers? Let's take a deep dive into connecting with small, passionate communities with Alan Bunny of Panda Global, Stephen Ellis of Pipeline, and Nicole Lapointe Jameson of Evil Geniuses.
Thank you very much. And I'm really excited to have this panel and this specific conversation at Esports Rising this year. We talk so much in our coverage and in our general discussions and in the other panels that you've heard from today about the Overwatch League, League of Legends, the franchised esports, the big names. But the reality is that esports is such a broad, massive global ecosystem of dozens and dozens of games that don't get a lot of that same level of discussion, but there's so much opportunity in those spaces that we wanted to take just a little bit of time today to be able to educate a little bit about that. And so, Nicole, I wanted to start with you as an organization that is in some of those bigger games and has a lot of experience working in the larger spaces, but also investing in things like the fighting game community and other smaller spaces. From your perspective, why does it make sense for an esports organization to engage in these non-franchise opportunities that might not have the same metrics and scale that something like the League of Legends has?
It's a great point, Trent, in that the spectrum of what encapsulates esports is pretty broad. You have the traditional sports model, heavy hitter, heavy franchise titles, and then you have things that resemble more of the content creator or influencer or smaller scale competitive scenes. And the fighting games community for us is very exciting, and we're something we're pleased to be in because it is a strong community, both from a brand storytelling perspective. Like, these are competitors and athletes that are welcomed and encouraged to be themselves in their own person. And that's where brands, partners, fans really get aligned and excited by that space. And, EG in particular, we have fighting games players that really have leaned into their individual identity. We use that as one of our major platforms to showcase how we care about diversity and inclusion, as we have players that are in the LGBTQ plus community. We have players that care heavily about mental health stigma. We have players that care heavily about making sure that they act as representatives as well as top tier competitive athletes. And for an org to play into this space resonates a lot more broadly and is easier to understand and get rally behind and engage with as a sponsor or a partner brand.
Absolutely. And since we started with the fighting game community, Alan, I think it makes sense to come to you, as that's where Panda Global has its roots and its focus, and just being in general a one versus one organization. For the fighting game community, it's something that, like I said, we don't hear as much about when we're talking about franchise esports and these sorts of things. And it might be something that's a little bit harder for a brand that's new to esports to understand. So from your perspective, having done a number of sponsorship deals specifically for fighting game opportunities, can you give just sort of the elevator pitch of why it would be an exciting opportunity for a brand to engage in that space?
I think exactly as Nicole was mentioning, it's a space that has a very high amount of engagement. It has a very high amount of fans being involved with the players, and the players being involved in community, in outreach, in different aspects and different levels that I think could fit with brands extraordinarily well. And when we go to brands, we pitch them that, hey, these games are the grassroots titles. These games are the titles, actually the longest living titles like esports in existence to this date are fighting games, and they're not going anywhere. You can say that some games are a flash in the pan, and I'm very sorry to anyone that's invested in H1Z1. That was a difficult time, but fighting games have been around for 20 years, and they'll be here for 20 years. Sure, they have ups and downs, but they're never going anywhere. So I also say it's incredibly safe to do these titles. These titles will always have sort of a base level, and when they have a sequel or a new game, they'll have that uptick, they'll have that new audience, and they'll just keep slowly growing over time and hitting those great metrics. So for brands, I basically show them, look, you can get amazing engagement, you can do really authentic things with these gamers, and they'll really care about it. And we find that with our sponsors too. They find the engagement in fighting game community is second to none, in that they get so much, not just overall impressions, but positive levels of engagement where fans ask for that brand to get re-involved again because their experience was so good.
Absolutely. And Stephen, I want to follow up on that point of engagement. When we talk about esports, we talk about competition and tournaments and these sorts of things. But the reality is that esports and content creation, streaming, YouTube, these sorts of things are so tightly meshed together. And obviously, when you have a smaller game, you're also going to have creators that don't have the same scale of viewership metrics that an XQC or a Ninja might have. But in the work that you do, what sort of things do you see when a brand sees an opportunity to engage with communities that maybe don't have that same level of scale? Is there a reason to get involved with a content creator that doesn't have that same pull that a top League of Legends streamer might?
Yeah, I think one of the things that esports is kind of unique is the depth of access and the authenticity and the connection that you can have with players and talent within the space. And noticing myself as a player in the past, when the league became a lot more professional and we're talking about these tier one leagues, it actually became harder for me to be my authentic self and relate in a way in which I otherwise would be able to do in a smaller game. So I think when you highlight something like the fighting game community, while yes, in aggregate, it might be smaller numbers, but the intensity of those fans is much higher because of how the talent themselves can actually interact and engage with the community on a more frequent basis. So I think as a brand, knowing that going in, that okay, there might be a little less polish with some of the talent in this space, but the level of engagement and authenticity the creator brings and the depth of relationship is much higher. On our side, a lot of brands find it really challenging to get involved with the tier one esports, whether that's because they're priced out or there's just not enough inventory. So as you start to move down into smaller talent, there's more accessibility. The challenge is finding how do you work with them in those different sectors. So I think whether it's through teams or whether it's through agencies, there's different avenues to actually work and engage with those smaller tournaments or smaller creators.
And Alan mentioned that the fighting game community has been around forever. It's a safe, sort of less risky venture than maybe a brand new game that's come out. But as an esports organization, obviously new trends, new games are going to come. This is an industry that changes constantly with the release of a new game, a new update. Among Us is a perfect example of a game that was released 2 years ago, but 6 months ago changed the entire landscape of Twitch streaming. So Nicole, as an esports organization that's always looking for those new opportunities, how do you determine when a game is small but has potential, has that increased engagement that Stephen was mentioning that a passionate grassroots community might have, or when something is just a month-long fad that's going to fade off and isn't worth taking the risk and investing the money in?
This is a hard question because this is the secret sauce, right? And, I've been lucky in that one of the playbooks I've inherited, EG is a very old and tenured brand in the esports space. So in our 21-year history, we have always been smart in how and why we enter into titles and when we stay or when we leave. And in that, the decision making that goes into especially the larger franchise games, right? Those are not decisions taken lightly or not taken flavor of the month style, because those require heavy investment, both from a time perspective, a dollars perspective, as well as a how do we win and compete and be a standing presence in that point of view. What's interesting about the fighting games community or the smaller influencer community is that you have more wiggle room, because from a dollars perspective, the fighting games community has been exceptional in COVID as they're not league controlled or not franchised. They've been able to put on community events. So things have been able to continue, and we've been able to flex more creatively with less downside risk. And how do we engage in those spaces? And so there's a lot of boxes that we have to check, but we are able to have more fun. And again, as Stephen mentioned earlier, drive more into the what do players care about and the communities care about authentically, as well as what aligns with our partners' interest when we explore these spaces. A good example is actually in COVID, we had to pivot a lot of what we did in terms of title selection or even partner activations. But with our fighting games players, we were able to host really amazing. We actually did a partnership with Amazon's The Boys with Sonic Fox, one of our fighting games players, and it brought in over 2 million viewers. because people love the brand. They love that it's exciting. They don't care if they're good or bad. They just want the opportunity to engage with the talent. And so that enables us to be more nimble when exploring the more fighting games and grassroots community title angles.
And so, Stephen, I wanted to come back to you as somebody who's been a competitor and a player in the early days of League of Legends. You know, when we talk about smaller esports from the player and the organization side, certainly we understand the landscape, but I think the fans also understand that their game maybe doesn't have the viewership and the prestige of a major franchise title. And one of the things that I think we see is that when a brand comes into a smaller game or supports a smaller creator, there's that level of recognition that the fans can see that comes from a brand, especially a non-endemic brand, recognizing that there's value in that space. Is that something that you see creating a different type of relationship between either the game or the creator as brands come in to support something that's not one of these top tier esports?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember back in the early days of League of Legends and having new brands come into the space and, help us afford travel. This is way back. I'm talking, 9 years ago, but brands that would support us and covering our travel and going because we didn't have the infrastructure that we have today. And that was huge for us as players getting able to compete. And you as a brand were helping facilitate that. And it is in the smaller ecosystems, there is infrastructure challenges. And I think when you as a brand, come in and you recognize that, but you see the good and where you can help, it actually goes a long way in, winning the hearts of the fans because they are so passionate about this space. And when they see a new brand come in, they're like, wow, this sponsor is coming in and help elevate our ecosystem. You can actually grow up with that ecosystem over time. So I think it's a great opportunity if you're looking like as a 3-5 year horizon. How can I help grow this ecosystem over time and partner for the long term versus what's an activation that we can do tomorrow and start looking at a longer horizon.
So, Alan, how do you do that when you're working with a brand? How do you create that sort of relationship if a brand wants to come into one of these smaller spaces?
For us, we actually take a lot of pride in growing the community, and I think this lends itself towards both what Stephen and Nicole were talking about earlier, where grassroots games that are untapped from franchise leagues allow us flexibility and allow us to do so much more. So we have a lot of fun projects that we do that we do for the community and to grow the community, and because we have so many in the pipelines. I mean, we have even more than we've announced that are coming next couple of months. It allows us to say, hey, X brand, I think this is a good fit for you guys. Would you like to try this out? So for example, we, Geico, we do Pokemon VGC. So we're probably one of the only teams that does competitive Pokemon, which is fine. It's a very small niche, but Pokemon's a very big game. So the Geico a couple of years ago did an invitational, for Pokemon before the new series was out. And it was so huge in the community that for years after that, people asked for it again because they'd never seen anything like that before. And they'd never had that before. And that sort of thing is where the brands feel good, the brands feel valued more than just as a brand, more than just engagement impressions. Those straight numbers that they pitch their bosses, they also say, hey, look at what they're saying about us, look at what we did and what we accomplished. So Red Bull, for example, partners with us for the PGR, which is the official rankings for Smash Brothers, and it becomes a sort of Red Bull production. So people attach that growth of their community and that staple in their community with Red Bull. And that's a very positive engagement, allows them to do so many other things in the community with super high engagement because they love them so much. And that's just one of the examples there. So I'm very, very stoked to be in games that don't have strict rules because I get to do so many fun things all the time. And it's never of a, well, can I? It's a, well, when can I?
Nicole, on the setting expectations side, I think this is a conversation that's been going on for a long time in esports. We all remember the comparisons of viewership numbers for League of Legends to the Super Bowl and the maybe not 100% correctness of those sorts of things. And there's always been questions about a bubble and these sorts of things. And when brands are seeing those sorts of conversations and they're FOMOing into esports because they need to be a part of the next big thing, if you're talking to that brand then about some of these smaller games that maybe don't pull the same numbers of a League of Legends, how do you set that expectation of why this is a good opportunity and what you can expect in return for your investment there.
One thing that's very fascinating about the FGC community and fan base is they skew much more progressive, diverse, and tolerant than a lot of other, even what you would assume exists in gaming. And we've had just this morning, it was announced that we really played into that, educating and showing this is the people, this is the youth. Like, fighting games is an authentic vehicle to connect and engage and showcase high ethics values. One of our players, Ricky Ortiz, she's a transgender woman, and she actually is in a global ad campaign with Tessa Thompson and Jolyn Tsai for Absolute Vodka, which are like brands and names and faces that is very ubiquitous, right? Very broad in terms of accessibility and global popularity. And to get them to understand the storyline, right? Why would Ricky be a good fit? And why does she also showcase the same values and fandom and reach that they would want with the other celebrities in the space? Was surprisingly easy when you look at the numbers of FGC versus many of the other communities. And so if you, again, follow the storyline, follow the fan demographic, and showcase here's an accessible, easy to understand from a competitive format, and look at the faces that encompass this community, brands tend to get excited because it's an easy step into esports that is still authentic and less daunting as some of the other big franchised, heavily regulated, lots of layer titles.
And Alan, we've obviously talked a lot about the fighting game community. It's something that I know we're very passionate about, so I'm definitely happy that we've gotten to put that spotlight there. But if I'm a brand or an investor that's looking at this opportunity, I want to see what else is out there when it comes to these smaller communities outside of the League of Legends and Overwatch leagues of the world. Is there any other genre, any other space that I should really be starting to educate myself on beyond the Street Fighters and Smash Brothers of the world?
I think that really depends on what you're looking for as an investor or as a brand, and understanding what you want out of your investment is the most important thing. So when I talk to investors, I let them know, hey, these are the expectations you should be setting for yourself. This is what we should be seeing, and you're in for the long haul if you do these small games. And that's the thing. When you're choosing these smaller titles, you're choosing a more I think sticky fan base, a fan base that will watch you grow, that will be attached to you from the hip because they're so thankful for what you did for them and being part of that. And it's a great way for any brand or investor that's looking to join the space to essentially get that snowball rolling. And in the snowball starts small, and then you just pile on, pile on, pile on, pile on. And that's sort of where it comes from that core. That core is really what we're shooting for. And as we grow, we're adding more and more and more. But I'm seeing the same names pop up on our social media that have been engaging with us for 4 years. The same people have been huge fans of us because of what the huge difference we've been able to make in these small spaces. We've created this incredibly dedicated fan base that is activatable at so many different levels. So when I talk to these investors and things, I say, look at these other titles, don't ignore them. It's so hard to 100% activate everybody within a community, no matter what game you're doing, unless it's a really small one, because they're all just so happy for you to be there that they will stick to you like glue. And I think that is incredibly valuable and cannot be overstated. That yes, those big games do matter. They do, certainly do. But if you also pay attention to those small communities, you will have a core stronger than anyone else out there. And I know that we've worked on that for years, and I think we've created that so far. And that's sort of my philosophy to it.
Excellent. Well, we have unfortunately hit our time limit for today, but thank you all so much for taking the time to share your insights with us and getting an opportunity to shed a spotlight on these opportunities that are in these smaller spaces. I think it was an excellent opportunity to educate on these things, and I look forward to being able to do so again in the future.
Thanks, Trent.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.